CharityVillage Connects. Today we're talking about the urgent need for the nonprofit sector to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion in its operations, leadership, and workplace. Joining me today is Chanel Grenaway, the CEO and founder of Grenaway Associates. Chanel has over 15 years' experience in building organizational capacity of nonprofit organizations across Canada, and clients of her DEI and other nonprofit consulting work has included ONN, City of Toronto, United Way GTA, and Charity Village. Welcome, Chanel.
Thanks so much, Mary, for having me today.
You know, over the past 2.5 years, we've seen a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of self-examination from nonprofit leaders in the sector related to diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. But I'm curious, from your perspective, are we seeing real change happening on the ground? In your work with nonprofit organizations, are you finding that they're doing the hard work that's necessary to make DEI in their organizations a reality?
That's a great question, Mary, and something I've been thinking about, especially as we end this year, and I am doing a bit of reflection work on my impact with clients. You know, I don't think we can deny that conversations are happening. Definitely my work is in the nonprofit sector, but I'm also hearing it from other sectors, through family and friends and their work. So everyone is really having some type of conversation about what's happening in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, what they're seeing, what they're feeling. So conversations are happening. I would also say that awareness building is happening, and what I would sometimes call noticing. So people, leaders, staff, board of directors are now taking pause and noticing their own biases. They're noticing how the system that we all operate in, how it has become this our autopilot. And because of that, if we don't stop and notice, we're not going to achieve the equitable outcomes that we want. So they're noticing that we need to go beyond diversity, right? We need to really delve deeper into inclusion and equity and really figure out what that means. So that's what I'm seeing. What I'm not seeing, though, yet, and I say yet because I can only have an optimistic attitude in order to stay in this work, I'm not seeing lots of headway in terms of conversations around power, conversations around privilege, conversations related to how decisions are made. So conversations really related to cultural change and organizational structure change that'll actually start to produce the outcomes that we want. So maybe, as you mentioned, some of those deeper conversations, some organizations are doing them, but writ large, I think, that's where I would love to see more work happen, really in those areas where we're, what I would say, where we're disrupting and dismantling, systems of power and privilege that, again, are not contributing to the equity that we want to see.
Well, what you're describing is something that certainly echoes what we heard from many of the respondents in our Charity Village Diversity Survey report, who expressed the fact that although they wanted to do a better job of integrating DEI into their organizations, they really struggled with knowing what to do, what to tackle first, where to start. What kind of advice would you have for organizations that are just beginning their DEI journey?
Yeah. So first, let me say that oftentimes my first conversation with potential clients, starts with me empathizing with the fact that, this is hard work. It's nuanced work. It's complex work. That, like you said, many of them do feel we don't know where to start. You're not alone in that. What I would say is awareness building and doing that pause and reflection piece is super, super critical. And I know when I say that, because I've experienced it in conversations, people, they pause when I say that because I don't think people acknowledge the impact of doing that awareness building and noticing work. it's not tangible, it's not concrete. You can't quantify it, right? So it's hard to put that as an action item and report back. However, what I do say when I get a little bit of resistance or people want me to clarify, well, why do we have to start with awareness? I remind people that in order to change something, you have to be aware of it, right? If you don't see it, again, you're not going to recognize it time and time again. So when I speak about awareness building, it really is, what are you doing in your day-to-day work to acknowledge and recognize the experiences of Black, Indigenous, and people of color and other people who experience exclusion and discrimination. What are you doing within your strategic planning, within conversations that you're having, again, at either board tables, decision-making tables, to really demonstrate values and practices related to equity and inclusion. So it's the noticing piece and starting with that is really happens on three levels. It happens on an individual level. So again, noticing your own bias and how you fit and where your privilege and power lies within the system. It happens at an organizational level. So again, in your role and in your day-to-day work. And then as a collective team. So you can look at it again as a collective team within your department or organization, or even again, bigger or more broadly, your role in your community and society. So there's so much to be done just in that taking time to learn and unlearn, build your awareness, use reflective practices as a starting point. And then I would say you move into the sense-making piece. What does this mean for me, my team, my community, my organization? So I'll leave it there as a potential starting place for leaders and staff.
Right. So it's kind of, would you say it's like taking an audit in a way, finding out your starting point? Because I guess everybody starts at a different place on this journey, organizationally, but also as an individual.
Definitely. And definitely a part of that awareness building and noticing could be an assessment, could be an audit. It could be, some type of information gathering, survey, conversations with staff, with communities. So yeah, that definitely could be a starting place. And then from that, you do the sense making, and then eventually the ultimate goal is you want to move to action, right? I always say you don't stay too much in the awareness building and the assessment piece. You want to start action, in a purposeful, intentional way, once you've gathered some of that information.
It's so interesting because there have been some reports about DEI initiatives and, from a more kind of research-oriented way. The Harvard Business Review, for example, had quite an influential report that found that the majority of diversity programs actually fail. Why do you think that is? What can nonprofits do to ensure that they actually do succeed when they undertake this work?
Yeah. So I imagine, in that article, and I've seen other related articles that have been now gauging, again, the sector in various sectors in terms of their commitment to this work. We all remember 2020 seeing many corporate and nonprofit commitment statements, right? So yeah, people are now watching and they're going back to websites and they're going in and maybe calling up some leaders to see, how are you doing with this work? And yes, I imagine, I haven't done my own official report card, but I imagine that many maybe have not progressed as they thought they would. Or maybe again, like you said, some have totally failed. There's a few things that could be happening there. And in my experience, when I'm keeping in contact with past clients, one of the things I'm hearing is related to a metaphor that I use, which is you have to keep the kettle hot, right? So sometimes I will call up an organization that I worked with a few years ago, and they'll admit to me, and I can sense a bit of guilt and shame around this, but they'll admit that other priorities have come up. they've had to deal with other issues, and they've let the equity and inclusion piece slide a little bit. So in that case, they didn't keep the kettle hot, right? Like they did some work, and maybe they started with an action plan, but for whatever reason, the work stopped. So what I would say in that case again is, and if I were to go back to an organization, I would say, we're not, how can we start again? How can we reignite? How can we pick up where we left off? But this time, how do we embed practices that that help to keep the momentum up? So and these are really day-to-day things that you can do to build the capacity of your staff and of your leadership to prioritize questions related to equity and inclusion and anti-racism, anti-oppression. So there are techniques and ways that you can do the work while you're still working on, again, your core mission, or you're still working on issues that, yes, you need to address immediately. I would say another thing that I'm seeing in terms of, organizations that might not be advancing their work or started and stopped is are cases where the organizational culture might not have been fully ready and to engage in this work. So, and if your organizational culture, again, is, and I'm not saying it has to be 100% ready, but if your organizational culture is fragile in that one mistake is made and then resistance comes back, the fear comes back, and you just drop it, well, you're doing, again, a disservice. If your organizational culture is there where there are champions, but the champions are not supported and by leadership and or supported with resources, again, you might have a case of apathy where, again, we've tried to do this, it's not working, well, let's just forget it. So I think looking at the organizational prerequisites, looking at your organizational culture, what do you do when mistakes and failures and missteps happen, because they will? How do you work through those difficult conversations that are going to be uncomfortable and might not be received well by everyone? Again, what resources are you dedicating to this? And what practices are you embedding everywhere within the organization so that this work becomes, normalized? I want conversations about race and equity and inclusion to be normal parts of our information gathering, our decision making, our planning, and I think that's the muscle. And I talk about this work as a practice and as a muscle that we all need to build. I'll leave it there.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about this work that I've sort of been better informed about was the impact of intersectionality and how critical that is to understand the nuances that creates when we're looking at DEI building and capacity building for organizations in this space. How do we help organizations focus on a broader representation when crafting their DEI strategy with a view to being cognizant of the impact of intersectionality?
When I hear that question, my immediate thought is, why wouldn't an organization want to include the diversity of experience, knowledge, wisdom, uniqueness, of their staff and or partners, community members, of their community? To me, they're doing themselves a great disservice if you're really not inviting in, someone, not inviting in and creating a space for someone to bring their whole, you've heard the term, bring your whole selves to work, right? Part of me, I guess maybe being in this work for so long, it's obvious to me the benefits of, again, building deeper understanding of people's lived experiences, the value in recognizing that everyone comes with such wonderful assets and strengths and culture in their own way that can only add to your mission and vision. and many, organizations, that I work with, have wonderful visions of societies where we're all thriving, right? Where we can all engage and participate in society. What does that really mean? And if you really are holding yourselves accountable to that, then intersectionality, again, should be one of those things that come easy. You should actually want to be able to, again, deepen your knowledge about the staff you're working with, because then you're creating that welcoming space. You're creating a space where they feel that they can belong, and then you're enabling them to, yes, participate in a way that they can bring in their ideas, their backgrounds, their own, unique ways of thinking that, again, can contribute to your mission and vision. So I'm hoping that we can, that organizations, if they look at it that way, if they look at the cost of not applying an intersectional lens, and again, build that muscle to create those welcoming spaces, that could be sort of a motivating factor. The other thing I'll say is that, it's, while this work is complex and nuanced, but it's not impossible. And it's, I would say, start at a point that's reasonable and feasible, and again, build your capacity, and then you expand from there and you do it again. This work is very iterative, right? So yes, in the beginning, you might be weary of getting it wrong and of not including everyone, but I would say, start where you can, given the scope and scale of a project or an initiative, and learn from that, and just keep on building. You'll be amazed, again, I think, of what can be done, again, just by being intentional and purposeful in regards to intersectionality.
There's been increasing focus on adding justice to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you explain, what this is about for those that may be just entering this world in terms of thinking about DEI? What does the justice lens entail, and what is meant by that?
Yeah, so I look at the sort of journey of towards equality on a continuum. And again, I think many organizations have started with diversity work, and then maybe they move to inclusion work, equity work, and then there is this frame now and language around justice. And for me, a justice lens and a justice approach is really looking at the systemic barriers and structures that, again, are legacies of colonization that exist in almost every sphere of society that we're all, working and living under. That again are creating harm and exclusionary practices for Black, First Nations, Métis, Inuit people, racialized communities, and other, equity-seeking groups. So justice says, taking a justice lens, ask really specific and explicit questions related to the system, right? So it could question things like, again, language that we use. Language is powerful and carries meaning, right? So in some spaces, I've had conversations with boards and EDs about, what does it mean to be equity-centered, and using equity-centered as a justice approach, because we're actually trying, again, to change structures within the organization. So we're looking at, again, systems change within an organization. It could be looking at, justice can be looking at, again, decision-making processes. It could be looking at policies. So anything that has an impact at a systems level, and again, you can define that systems level, systems within an organization, or even beyond, systems within a community. Justice is asking you to go that extra mile, that extra length to find points of access, where again, you can disrupt, dismantle the actual system. And I think, there's many paths towards equity and equality. I truly believe that there are places and spaces where, yes, a justice lens is valid and should be used, and we need to start there. But there are other places and spaces where, you start working within the system and you can start making changes there. If you're working within the system, what I always advise is that you find ways that you can impact or influence the system. So even though you might be working on something a little bit more micro, take your learnings, share them. How can you use that to advocate for systems change? So for, again, that justice lens. There's multiple ways of doing this work. And I'm so glad that there are many champions, many consultants, many advisors that are working. Some work within the system. And I would say I'm probably one of those that work within the system and with organizations. But there are others that are out there doing that really good fight of justice and really trying to get at the systemic issues.
Well, there's so much to talk about, but I wanted to bring us to a close to give you an opportunity to give any final advice you'd like to give to nonprofit organizations or leaders of those organizations that you think you'd like to share to help them along the way on this DEI journey.
Yeah, I think I might iterate some of the things that I've already shared. One of them is this work is so important, and so and so complex. How do you find your own why, right? And how do you use your own why? And again, it could be a personal reasons, professional reasons. But how do you use that why to keep that kettle hot, right? I think looking at this work as a practice, as something that you're not going to get right the first try, second try, or third try, but that you have to keep practicing, you have to keep building your muscle, is also a good framing, especially when the times get tough and especially when mistakes are made. And like I just mentioned, there is no one way to do this work, no one way, and there's no one size fits all, and it takes time, right? So, what can you do? How can you, again, carve out a process and a practice that works for you? What I'm finding with a lot of leaders and boards is that getting connected with peers that are doing the same work it can be valuable. There's so much, online in terms of resources. And again, do you like listening to podcasts? Do you like reading articles? Do you like novels? Like, find what works for you in terms of your learning and unlearning journey. And of course, there's, lots of individuals like myself and other coaches that, again, sometimes it might be good, to bring in that external support to keep that kettle hot and to bounce ideas off of. So.
Chanel, it was lovely working with you. Charity Village has gained so much in the weeks that we've spent working with you on our DEI strategy. And I really wanted to thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insight and advice today. It's so extremely valuable for our audience of nonprofit professionals. So thank you so much. It was lovely to have this opportunity to speak again.
My pleasure, Mary. And so glad to have this platform and really excited about the year ahead and what we might see in terms of ongoing work in this area. So thanks again for having me.